We hear it nearly every day. Somebody calls and says, I'm contemplating divorce, but I'm worried about how that might affect my kids. But when I ask my friends, they all tell me, you can't be thinking about the kids. You've got to be thinking about what makes you happy, and your kids are going to be fine. And sometimes they'll even say, my kids are fine. We divorced years ago, and it didn't affect them one iota. And I've even heard people who are like marriage counselors say, kids are resilient. They'll be all right. They'll make it. Is that true? Well, on this particular episode, I could be sharing with you a ton of research done by universities all over the world, indicating what kind of effect it has on kids when parents divorce. But that's not what I want to do today. I also could bring on a kid. So this kid right here, some teenager perhaps, or even preteen, and look at him or her and say to the preteen or teenager, how is your parents' divorce affecting you? But here's what you would probably think. I mean, you would feel for the kid because you've got a heart, but you'd be thinking, oh, he's a kid, she's a kid, they'll grow out of it. So I brought a big kid. Hope you don't mind me referring you to as a big kid. This is my friend, Marc Highland. He's also a colleague. He works with us here at Marriage Helper, working with marriages every day, by the way. But we were talking the other day, and Marc began to talk about his parents' divorce. And the more I listened, the more I thought, okay, let's hear from a grown kid whose parents divorced and ask, how did that affect you, and how does it affect you to this day? So, Marc, first of all, welcome, and thank you for doing this.
You're very welcome.
Okay. If I may ask, how old were you when your parents divorced?
My parents separated when I was 14.
14.
Their divorce was not final until they were 17.
Or till you were 17?
Yes, I was 17. Excuse me. Okay. I'll get it straight here in a second.
They couldn't be 17 if you were 14.
Yes, thank you very much for that that obvious answer. That's why I love you, Dr. Beam.
All right, so Dad was out of the house from 14 on?
Yes. My father was out of the house. They had been married 25 years when they divorced. Mm-hmm. My father was a pastor and had been for many, many years. Mm-hmm. Now, understand there was a lot of infidelity involved on his part.
On his part.
Yes, exactly. My mother was the consistent one, consistently wanting to save the marriage.
So as a kid, did you know about your dad's infidelity?
Not until I was in my early teens.
Okay. And then, if I may ask, how did you find out?
A couple of ways. Obviously, the big way was I was told. By Mom.
Okay.
Mom told me what was going on.
All right.
Now, the other way I found out was simply observing.
Okay. You were a bright kid. You saw what was going on.
Well, I won't say bright, but I did see what was going on. It was very much in front of me.
Okay. And so when they separated, were you surprised?
No. The story as it happened was my father had to leave the pastorate because of his behavior.
Right.
We then moved 1,000 miles away. When we moved, my parents started traditional marriage counseling.
Okay.
That's when I truly knew things were going on. So I moved from a small town in Kentucky to Fort Worth, Texas.
Pretty nice sized town there.
Yes. It was a great culture shock.
Okay. So they tried this for a while. They wound up separated. They wound up divorced.
Yes.
Was there any part of you that was happy about that?
No.
Like, well, at least we have peace in the home, or nothing like that?
Nothing like that. For the reason being is, okay, my father is now separated. He's moving on. My mother, for lack of a better term, is a basket case, incredibly bitter. And so when I came home, that's what I heard.
Okay. And how many siblings, kids altogether?
I have an older sister. She is 6 years older than I.
Okay, so there were two of you in the home. So if you were 14 when your parents separated, she was already adult. She was 20.
Yes, she was in college.
Okay. All right. So it's basically you and Mom.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Now, let me just stop right here before we go further, because I want to ask how this affected you. But I can imagine there are people right now listening going, wait a minute, Marc's story is not going to be applicable to me for a couple of reasons. One is the fact that my parents fight. Therefore, he said that wasn't the case there. It was Dad's infidelity. So our situation's not the same. Or, Marc's mom apparently made an error here when she told Marc about the infidelity. And then the fact that you just said Mom was incredibly bitter. So as we go through your story, I want to come back to those two things, because as we talk about this, I know that people are going to be saying, yeah, but my kids aren't in a situation where one of us is going to be bitter, or at least they think that. Or it's going to be like, but there really is vitriol, there's anger, there's fighting in my house, and that makes it different. So I want to come back to that. So for those of you who are listening, know that we recognize those things right off the bat, okay? We're not trying to say Mark's story fits all yet. I'm going to be saying by the end of this video that it applies to people more than you think it does, even if the situation is not exactly the same. So what were you feeling emotionally when Dad left?
Oh, goodness. Obviously, a lot of anger. I felt lost. Understand that a father in a home is seen as a guide, as a role model, as one to look up to, especially when your father is in the ministry.
So you felt abandoned?
Yes, you could say abandoned. Yes.
And disappointed.
Obviously.
Did you feel that maybe you weren't as important to him as whatever he was headed toward?
Later on. Definitely later on. That happened further on down the story, and not to jump ahead here, that my father later remarried. And he moved on emotionally. Once he remarried, and I believe I can speak for my sister in this respect, is that we both felt we had been replaced.
It's interesting, and we'll refer to a couple of studies here. In the United States, where we live, about 1 out of 4 dads, within a year of the time that they divorce their wives, have little to nothing to do with their own kids, at least 1 out of 4. The number used to be actually cited as higher, but it has dropped down and seems to be now going back up again. So what your dad did, in the sense that he didn't have that much he wasn't that involved in your life, is that correct?
That's correct. He still maintained contact. A lot of that was, I can't say for sure, but felt like out of guilt. I do know that, my father loved me. Later in life, he and I reconnected to a degree, but not to the degree that most parents do.
Okay. So you felt abandoned, you felt rejected, you felt at some point, when you said a little older, about what age did you and your sister, well, let's talk about your age, about what age when you thought, I've been replaced?
My father remarried when I was a senior in high school. The divorce had been final a week.
And so it wasn't just like, my mom's been replaced.
The whole family.
We've all been replaced. He's now
Yes.
started another family.
Yes, with 2 kids.
Okay, so the lady already had 2 kids.
Yes.
And did you feel now that that's where he put his attention rather than?
Yes.
Now, we hear that kind of thing all the time. I know you do, Mark, because you work with us here. We regularly hear from people, from adults, who tell us, I felt like I had been just, as Mark said, I've been replaced. That I had been my dad or my mom's child, but now after a while, he or she married somebody else and either had kids with that person or that person had children. And then it was like, I'm not as important to you. And they actually spent more time focusing on the other. Now, this happens so consistently, so regularly, that this is not a unique Mark thing.
No, it's not.
We hear this from people on the phone all day
Consistently.
long.
Consistently.
Like my dad, and it's more often the dad in these situations because the kids tend to live with mom.
Yes.
And so it's my dad abandoned me. And in the situations where the kids wind up living with dad, it's my mom abandoned me.
Yes.
And these other people became more important to my parent
Yes.
than I. As best you can describe, and I realize you're not a touchy-feely guy, you're a very practical
I
guy.
am, yes.
But as much as you can describe, how does that feel?
So you feel as if you are not worthy. You feel as if you are not a child of that parent anymore.
And so what did that make you feel about you?
You doubt yourself. You truly do. You doubt yourself. Does it make you grow up quickly? Absolutely. You have to grow up instantly.
But what did it do to your self-esteem, if anything?
It made you doubt what you could actually do, who you actually were as a person. It made me doubt, on a personal level, it made me doubt who God was. I understand that not everyone we deal with has a faith base in their life. I grew up with that. And so I'm not trying to speak to an area that could be offensive to anyone at all.
But God had been an important part of your life,
Absolutely.
and now you were doubting.
Absolutely.
Did you wonder whether people could just love you as you are?
Sure. And that just didn't go. And understand, this was high school. So with that being the case, high school is one of those places where you're doubting yourself anyway.
Yeah, that teenage angst.
Yes.
Pretty consistent.
Yes, I have a 17-year-old now. He's living that, even though my wife and I are happily married.
Yeah, teenagers go through a certain degree of angst as they go through.
Yes.
So it hurt your self-esteem. It changed your worldview in some ways.
Yes, it did.
And yet still your father had some interaction with you, you said.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. He kept up with me. If I needed something, he made sure he provided it physically, monetarily. When I was later in life and going through some crisis after college, he was there emotionally at that point in time.
So we're not painting the picture of this guy who just walked out of your life and you never saw him again, although, unfortunately, we hear those stories a lot as
Yes,
well.
we do.
But your dad wasn't that. And so even though your dad's trying in his own way,
Yes.
it doesn't alleviate the pain that you have.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And then when you're walking through life and you fail as a person, and then you think of it, oh my goodness, I'm just like my father. I don't want to repeat this. I don't want to repeat his actions. I want to be my own person. But then you look back and you go, wow, this is exactly what he did, and I'm just repeating a cycle. And that's painful.
Yeah. But you really haven't repeated the cycle and the things that, like the infidelity, the divorce.
No.
You're talking about some of the characteristics and traits.
Exactly. If anything, if any positive came out of this, I would say I learned what not to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Did I learn what to do to foster a marriage? Not necessarily. I just learned what not to do.
Some things to avoid.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Now, Mark's father died. It's less than a year now.
Memorial Day.
Okay. So coming up on a year as we sit and make this.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
How did that, and I'm not trying to milk anything here, Mark. I'm just trying to understand. What kind of things were you thinking about when that occurred?
It was interesting. I got the phone call that my father had passed, and I got it from my stepmother. And it was very quick. It was very sudden. He passed of natural causes of a heart attack, and it was just within a matter of minutes. The first thing that went through my mind was, this is going to be a really interesting funeral. I didn't know what was going to happen because at that point in time, understand, he was so ingrained in the step family that he had created. And while I was happy that he moved on with his life and he found happiness in that, there was still a side of the family that I felt needed representing that wasn't being represented at all, quite frankly.
Meaning your mom, you, and your sister.
Yes, exactly. My mother, interestingly enough, still wanted to go to the funeral.
Even though she was bitter.
Even though she was bitter, she still wanted to go to the funeral. I actually spoke at my father's funeral. I wasn't planning on it. The night before, I called my stepmother. I said, do you mind if I say a few words? And of course, she was gracious. She said, sure, be glad for you to. My sister, who was in town at that point, she came up and she asked me, why do you want to do this? Aren't you just hurting yourself? I was like, it's going to hurt, but I want to make sure our side of the family is represented. I want them to hear from us so that people know that we exist.
Kind of like, even though we felt abandoned, we didn't want to be non-existent.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, Mark, when you hear people saying, of course, we get the calls all the time. Mark's what we refer to as a client representative here at Marriage Helper, which means all day long he's on the phone talking to people who are in various kinds of marital difficulty or distress. Now, we work with marriages other than that as well, but Mark's a specialist in helping to guide those people to the right kind of resources. And if you ever call here and ask for a client representative, Mark is one. You might want to actually talk to him because you go, this guy gets it. He understands. I relate to him. So, Mark, when somebody says, well, my husband or my wife said, this is no big deal because my counselor or therapist said, or my friends said, or I read somewhere, that you shouldn't think about the kids, you should do what makes you happy, and the kids are resilient, they'll be fine, they'll get over it, it will have no long-lasting negative effect. When you hear that, what do you feel?
Well, I can't say that. I can't say that on camera. It's impossible. My measured reaction is, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you've learned that. A lot of people have expressed that sentiment to me and to other people. What we've found through my own life and through research is that's simply not the case. The emotional scars carry for many, many years to come. And unless you handle those emotional scars, they will creep up on you. And even if you handle them in a way that you feel is right and true, which is what I've tried to do over the last 10 years, they still creep up on you and they still linger.
And it still hurts.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Mark, when you look at what, and I'm not an expert in child development by any means, my PhD is in a different area altogether, but when kids first start out, I mean newborns, they really only fear two things, loud noises and falling.
Yes.
Because that's just built into us. Loud noises startle them, that scares them, and if they feel they're falling, they realize, I can't take care of myself.
Right.
Another very common thing that occurs pretty quickly, though, is when they finally begin to develop identity, like I exist. And this is my primary caregiver, and this is my primary caregiver, this is my mom, this is my dad, those kinds of things. Then a fear that develops within almost every kid is losing one or both of them.
Correct.
And when that fear actually occurs, and for you, it didn't occur when you were 4, it occurred when you were 14.
Right.
Now, we can get other people in to talk about how it feels when it occurs at 4. Right. We know that there are some differences based on where in life it occurred. We could also bring some people in that say, okay, talk about how it affects them when they're 40. Right. Because it always does. At some point, somehow it affects them. And so this fear of losing a parent, which is pervasive within us all, typically, the only thing that overcomes that fear is if they're afraid of the parent.
Right.
You follow what I'm saying?
Right.
I'm so scared of you that if you leave, I'm not afraid of you leaving. I actually feel some degree of relief because I don't feel loved. I don't feel liked. I don't feel respected. As a matter of fact, I fear that you're going to do more damage to me. Sure. In that case, kids are typically like, I kind of like my parent to go. But most of the situations we deal with are not, where they're afraid of the parent. They love the parent. Actually, those two can go together. You can love and still fear. But it's not because they're so afraid of the parent. What they're afraid of is the parent's going to leave. Now, interestingly, you talked about being angry. Was that anger directed more at your dad or more at your mom?
I believe it was both. I truly feel it was both. I don't feel it was toward one or the other. Yes, when I was younger, I did have anger toward my father because I knew what he did. Now, as I've grown older and as I have learned, especially now that I'm with Marriage Helper on staff, also 8 years ago when my wife and I were in crisis and we came through the Marriage Helper workshop, what I learned was it wasn't just his actions that caused my family's dissolution. I learned at that point that people don't leave what they have unless they believe where they're going is better.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're not justifying your father's infidelity, but you are saying that I came to realize my mom wasn't perfect either.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Both my sister and I look back on the situation and go, oh my goodness, there are so many signs that we missed that could have been avoided if the right help was available.
Okay.
I applaud people getting help for the marriage. I truly do. I want to help them so much.
Because of what you went through.
Exactly. The reason I do what I do is not just because Marriage Helper helped save my marriage 8 years ago, but because I don't want anyone else to deal with the pain I've dealt with.
So you felt pain and you felt anger toward mom, anger toward dad.
Sure.
Which one did you express more anger toward?
I didn't really express it.
You just swallowed it.
I swallowed it. I'm a stuffer.
And if we had a lot of time, which we don't, we're about out of time, but if we had a lot of time, we could talk about what that does to a person.
Exactly.
And so you've had some negative effects in your life because you swallowed the anger. Right?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
Your sister, did she express anger?
More so than I.
Toward which?
It's equal at this point. Now,
I mean, where she expressed it, did she ever show a lot of anger toward dad or show a lot of anger toward mom? Equal, different, how?
probably more toward dad at that point in time.
Because she was already 20.
Right. At this point in her life, I'm 50, my mother's 56. I mean, my sister's 56.
Yeah, I was going to say your mother
Yeah,
was a very
I know,
young
my
mother.
math is off today. This is horrible. But as it is, we really need to do a blooper reel. As it is, she now takes care of my mother in her home. My mother is 81.
But she loves mom.
And she does. But she also understands where she is.
So we could kind of summarize this because we're running out of time here. We summarize it. As I said earlier in this particular video, if you were listening to the earlier part, you might say, well, but it's not the same because Mark's dad was unfaithful and that's not occurring in our situation, or all the things. We could kind of nitpick this and say, well, it's different here for us and different here for us and different here for us. But I hope what you heard was that no matter what the situation, there's some underlying principles, one of which is that kids want their parents with them.
Yes.
And that when you move on, and particularly if you're not the parent that the kid lives with. So let's say dad moves on to marry somebody else and the kids live with mom. Or the kids live with dad, mom moves on to marry somebody else. The principle that Mark said, and I hope you heard it very clearly, is that almost always the children feel replaced. And if in your lifetime you've ever had that where I don't feel as valuable, I don't feel as lovely or lovable because of the fact that the person that once loved me now seems to be giving a lot of that love to somebody else that I feel is mine. And so even if the situations are a little different than your situation, the self-questioning that you talked about, the angst, the all kinds of things that are negatives, the anger, et cetera, et cetera. And so when people say, should I consider my kids when I make a decision about my marriage? You reply,
Absolutely. Absolutely. We consider the whole picture. We don't consider just one aspect of life. We all have responsibilities. And I'm not here to preach about what we should or should not do. That's not my role. Okay?
so you're not the lecturer saying this is what you should do. You're the adult kid who's saying, from my experience and my pain, this is what I'm asking you to do for the sake of your children.
Yes. Yes. Stop the cycle. Stop the cycle.
So let me, well, I'm going to sound like I'm lecturing, but we'll wrap it up this way. Here's the way I think about it. And by the way, I did divorce and leave my kids for 3 years. And by the grace of God, I was able to put that back together. Alice sent me back where we married to this day, and that was 35 years ago. To this day, I still see the effect on my children of what I did back then. And so now when people say, well, but it's really, I should just be happy. It should be my decision about my life. I don't owe my kids. Sometimes they don't use that last phrase. Sometimes they actually do, Mark.
Sometimes they do.
I don't owe my kids.
Yes.
I reply, you know, the hard lesson I learned is my kids didn't ask me to bring them into existence.
Correct.
Therefore, if one owes the other, they don't owe me. I owe them. I'm the one that brought them into existence. And then by that very act, and I realize a lot of people make babies without meaning to, but by the very act of making a new human being, I have some responsibilities to that human being. I mean, I brought him or her into the world. Now, I have all daughters, so it's her. And so I look at them and go, yeah, I think you really should consider your children because of the fact that you actually brought them into this world and you are a significant part of their lives, even if you're gone.
I have a philosophy when I'm working with clients and also when I look at my children in that up to a certain age, I am responsible for my children.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest daughter, who is now 20, I am less responsible for her, but I am still responsible to her to still be an effective parent. That is my responsibility.
Yeah.
My 10-year-old, which is my youngest, I'm responsible for him.
I got it. I understand.
Okay. And to him as a parent.
Right.
But all in all, we're all responsible to our children
Right.
to make decisions, not based on us, but based on we.
Based on we. I like that, Mark. That's very well said. So as we end this, I hope that you heard Mark's story, heard Mark's heart. If you'd like to talk to Mark about what we can do to help you with your marriage, then you can call him. Our telephone number will be on the screen here. And just give that number. And if you want to talk to Mark, you just ask, hey, can I speak to Mark? Now, we have other client representatives as well. If Mark is overwhelmed or too busy, we'll ask you to talk to somebody else. But this is the kind of heart that he has. So when it comes to divorce, does it affect kids for the rest of their lives, one way or the other? The answer you would give is
Absolutely.
thank you very much.